Design Notes is a show from Google Design about creative work and what it teaches us. I'm your host, Liam Spradlin. Each episode, we speak with people from unique creative fields to discover what inspires and unites us in our practice.
Welcome to Design Notes. I'm Aaron Lammer. I'm your guest host from the 2018 SPAN conference in Helsinki. I got a chance to talk to Marko Ahtisaari. He's the former design director of Nokia, and after some time at the MIT Media Lab, he is now back in Helsinki and had this to say about the Finnish people.
From a cultural point of view, I'm thinking purely from Finland, we're like the Nordic oddity. We sent a monster heavy metal band to the Eurovision Song Contest, and with very conflicted mind, people said, what have we done? And then they win.
We talked about how the spirit of Finland influences Finnish design.
There was this sense of kind of a gentler structure to life and a beautiful everyday, which was part of the larger social project of education for everyone.
Marko's most recent startup was concerned with how music could be used to heal.
We're looking at the health effects of music. So how could you actually potentially complement or replace pharmaceuticals using personalized sound and music?
Design Notes is brought to you by Google Design. You can find out more about all of Google Design's podcasts at design.google/podcasts. Where did you grow up in Finland?
I grew up in Finland in Helsinki until I was 5, but then moved with my parents to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and was there for a little while, moved from there to New York, then came back for high school in Finland, graduated from high school here, and then returned to New York to study at Columbia University there, and stayed there through undergraduate and grad school. And then through a series of twists and turns, ended up back here in Finland. So I kind of grew up on 3 continents. And
is it strange being known as a Finnish designer, considering that probably half of your life, more than half of your life, you've been away?
Yeah, I think at some point I had been away more than half my life. I think there are certainly things in Finnish identity and nature and lifestyle, if you like, that are deeply part of me, but then also those early years in Africa. Some friends say that they can kind of tell the colors and that I grew up in East Africa. I think other people are always better to see those things than yourself.
Was design something you thought a lot about as a young person growing up, and was it something that was prominent in your education as a Finnish high school student?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think there's if you think of the Nordics, Finland is we never became, even though we have a history of being in between Russia and Sweden historically and being part of each, and then we've been independent. We've never kind of ornamentation that comes with maybe royalty and sort of figuration. We've just a little bit in comparison, we're like the country cousins of the royals to the west and the
I like all
SARS
this inner Scandinavian politics. I've never asked people within Scandinavia what they think of the other people in Scandinavia.
No, I'm just trying to say I guess there's a real tradition of making things yourself, and then also we're a country and a society that industrialized and urbanized fairly late. So really it's something after the Second World War moving into the cities, and even though we're technologically very advanced, I'd say we're still figuring out what it's like to live in cities. And so every family pretty much, regardless of economic status, and will have some form of summer house in the extended family, so that in July, typically, in Finland, you'll just go and live in the countryside, and that place or cottage will likely be something you, at least in part, built yourself. You certainly keep renovating it. You may kind of chop the wood to heat it and so on. I don't mean this in a kind of rustic Walden way, but I think there's a connection with nature and then tinkering with things. But in Finland particularly, I think it's sparser and it's less ornamented and less refined somehow. And there I think there's more of a link towards, at least with friends and having visited some of the places, there's I think a deep link to Japanese culture somehow. Maybe it's also in the bathing, silence, some other things. But so I guess what I'm saying is you grow up with this, it comes with you. But I was always, from a design point of view, it was mainly early days of the internet and, seeing the Pine and then the Mosaic browser for the first time and looking at it and say, this thing is endless, and then wanting to get involved with that. And at that point, I was already in the States. So I guess there was a sensibility towards things through music and playing bass that had been a part of my life, was a part of my life at that time. But I'm self-taught and just stay curious. So it certainly wasn't early on, but I think it comes in this society. The one thing I'd also say is it's somehow imbued in some of our great designers like Aino and Alvar Aalto. The couple there was this sense of kind of a gentler structure to life and a beautiful everyday, which was part of the larger social project of education for everyone. This is pretty broad brush, right? But still, it's definitely there, that a beautiful everyday experience and having objects that are well crafted and simple but enhance well-being is kind of that general story. So I think the kind of design that comes from here, maybe this is the way to summarize it, is coming from values that are deeply in the societies.
I want to come back to that idea of wellness and a good life, because I know that's been a focus of some of your more recent work, but taking us back to the Mosaic browser and the idea of being self-taught. Where were you in your life when you had these early internet experiences, and what was the path that took you from there through, I understand you studied like philosophy and music, to the point where you're designing at Nokia? Like, how do you get from point A to point B?
It's a twisted path, no logic to it, but I remember I was meeting a former colleague once, and he said, you told me about the World Wide Web. I said, what are you talking about? And he's a professor of philosophy and mathematical logic. And it was just, we had a band at that point in New York with a percussionist called Mauro Hefosco and a few other musicians. But we had a URL. And so it was kind of to promote bands. So it was in addition to putting up the flyers, all around the village in Morningside Heights. We put the URL on there. It's interesting. There's actually a book by a guy called Jacques Attali, who was, I think, a major European central bank person. But it's called the Noise is the name of the book, and it's called The Political Economy of Music. And the thesis is that the business models and structures in the world of music predate those in the rest of society. So you look, so this is one kind of, you flyer and put the URL, so early days of online marketing, whatever. But so that was where I was. I then returned here and through a bunch of, did a bunch of early work on mobile interface design, and there wasn't really any place to learn that. Now we have schooling and education for, if you call it interaction design or user experience design, but just learned that on the job, then for a little while at Nokia, and then started doing startups with people that I respected and who saw something in my skills and, give you the courage to jump, and did that. Then
But I want to pause you there. So there's no basis for user experience design at this point. I'm guessing probably the word user experience design hasn't even been widely disseminated. So when you're trying to figure out the problems that would become user experience design, like how did you tackle those?
Yeah, I think it was, again, pretty pragmatic. I mean, you went after, in those days, it was these are pre-iPhone days. So these were browsers on early mobile phones. After that, I actually jumped, and that was interesting and also fairly early days. It was a startup developing basically free mobile service for a younger audience in exchange for advertising. So it was like an explicit deal. You get X text, Y minutes. Now, some models like that have been tried, but then it was fairly novel. And it was a virtual network operator. So we bought minutes and text wholesale, launched in the UK. It was right at the time Lehman was collapsing. So pretty hard time to sell alternative advertising for a new medium that no one believes is an advertising.
Not great timing.
And so that one learned a lot, and many good friends who've done extremely well. And then completely different, jumped into, we built a social network called Doppler, which was like a proto Foursquare for people that travel a great deal. And it was really, in that sense, part of the early web. It did only a few things really, really well and connected to a lot of services when there was an open internet and that was possible. And Nokia acquired that company. And that's when I went to head the design studio. And there the idea was bring together, this is 2009, bring together all of the industrial designers and user experience designers and packaging design into one studio, kind of reboot the portfolio from a design perspective. And also the brief was kind of design a better smartphone at a time when it was business-wise super challenging and the walls were shaking. And we worked on a product called the N9, which still very proud of. It's very lucky to have worked with such talented people. And despite the wall shaking, we were able to ship some, I think, very meaningful things, not just different for the sake of being different, but something a bit better. So I think there's this constant thread. It sounds like a cliche these days, but you just keep learning and you follow those things where you think you can contribute, and also for me, people, someone that inspires you to like, hey, in this context, I could learn a lot.
When you're working on these kind of projects, like here in Helsinki, do you feel like your geographical basis, being here in a relatively small country with a technology industry that is not as big as Palo Alto, say, affects how you work and think about what you're doing?
It's a really good question. I think most business, at least at the time I was working, most business is pretty global by nature. So it's, unless you're careful, it's kind of an endless series of telcos late into the night. From a cultural point of view, I'm thinking purely from Finland, we're like the Nordic oddity. Speak a little bit about it. Like, we sent a monster heavy metal band to the Eurovision Song Contest, and with very conflicted mind, people said, like, what have we done? And then they win, and there's a kind of oddity and we're not super slick, and then there's the whole thing, a relationship to nature, and these sometimes are called cliches, but they're very, I think, in a sense, true. So there's this kind of oddity in us, and not to be ashamed of that, but let that come out. And then in terms of software, that's how do you make software that's not like one is, you need to believe that it's interesting to have different kinds of software that feels like, and some people will say, no, it's all should be like easier to use in some way and grow, whatever. But I think what is interesting, maybe this is where it'll come in. We're seeing this model of the internet was built now on these layers of value, control, and capture on top of an open internet, which are essentially islands of the internet within the internet. And they're quasi-monopolistic systems of high growth where we get a free service for complete surveillance and exchange for advertising sales. But I think there's a lot of movements for a different kind of smaller social networks. Some I think people confuse it for nostalgia, only nostalgia for an early internet or the way it used to be, But what I mean by this is different forms of social networks and communication that are slightly smaller, that are slightly slower. And in a country like Finland, we are somewhat responsible for IRC, for Linux. So a lot of, and these are individuals within Finland. I don't think Finland should claim anything, but for some reason it happened here. I still believe in strong individuals, but somehow those and values imbued. So I'm very curious for the next phase of communication applications and protocols and platforms, if you like that word or not, but systems for people to communicate, that whether we could make some things that look a little bit more like Finland and the Nordics.
Does that idea come at all from your experiences in music? You've been in bands, you've toured, you've gigged, you've all of this stuff. How does your experience in those kind of communities inform your ideas about like how to design internet stuff?
Wow, it's a very good question. Not sure I know. I mean, my experience with me, I was playing back then. I took a 15-year break, and 3 years ago, next to a large CNC mill at MIT in the Fab Lab, I met a researcher called Nadia Peak, who's now a professor at the University of Washington, and she was very patient with me in showing me a large format shopbot. And we started a band together called Construction. And I think one area of music, we were talking about putting up posters with URLs in the way early days. There's some topic about how rights are divvied up in authorship in the arts, which I think still needs a bit of work. And there's a bunch of work on that at Berkeley and also MIT, kind of like how would you make it the information more available about authorship? So basically open APIs to stitch together the different disparate databases on publishing rights and things like that. I'm not sure how fundamental this is, but the funny thing is music is such a cultural force, and for each of us, right, so important. And yet economically, the whole thing is very small.
But you can learn a lot about the economics of anything by studying like something like how music works. I think about how, if Nokia or Google makes something and they hire a bunch of people like you, there's no question to who owns it. Nokia owns it. Like everything you ever did at Nokia is owned by Nokia. The minute you try to do something for yourself without someone else's money that requires more than one person, you're setting yourself up for a very awkward conversation.
I think there'll be more kind of, it's not a tools question or automate. It's as much about how to have those conversations as possible. But we now, let's say right after this podcast, we decide to stay here and jam a little bit. I'll get my bass, and then we put something immediately online.
There's a very nice
does it have
reverb in this room?
Does it have an ISRC number? What's the split? All of this information. When is that meta information being attached to the files? And
you've actually been working with sound recently. You've been at the MIT Media Lab and doing what brought you to the Media Lab first?
Well, it was Joey Ito, the director of the MIT Media Lab, whom I've known for a long time. He's been sometimes an investor in companies and also kind of a mentor, someone that, encouraged me early on to get into companies. And at the time when Microsoft acquired the phones business of Nokia, I faced the decision either to go with the acquisition or to not. And I decided to leave at that point, not because I was against, but I just thought like another big company for 4 years, if you want to impact the culture of product making, it takes a long time. And at that point, we just had a call with Joey and said, when you come here, they had a program called the Directors Fellows Program with a remarkable group of very diverse people, ranging from very well-known, like J.J. Abrams, to people that we hadn't heard of until Passion Murray, who's working on a project called Detroit Dirt, recycling garbage from a lot of the sports venues and restaurants and making dirt for Detroit. Just an example. There are tens of remarkable people and from whom I learned a great deal. And there I started thinking about well-being of the student population as well. MIT is a great place, but also pretty high high intensity. And at the same time, I was kind of returning to music, also met my bandmate, and then we met a few other people, both via the Media Lab and otherwise in Cambridge, who are looking at the health effects of music. So how could you actually potentially complement or replace pharmaceuticals using personalized sound and music? And we co-founded a company called Sync Project, which at the time it was acquired by Bose Corporation in February of this year. But at that time we were working on generative music, so algorithmically generated music meant to help people with both sleep disorders and acute pain, and had started our first clinical studies. And that work is continuing at Bose, and they can speak more about it, and I'm still involved. And I would say that I think if you take a long enough view, this will be perfectly normal in 10, 15 years' time. I think the idea that we'd use non-drug modalities that are affecting our senses and through that our brains, music is a particularly powerful one, but lighting certainly is, and other modalities. But music is particularly interesting because it when listening to music or playing music, but let's take just listening to music, your brain fires very broadly. So it's not only the auditory cortex, it's a lot of other effects that it's having. Somehow it seems very fundamental. We don't, of course, understand everything, but even though we don't understand everything, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be using it. So it just will take a little bit of time to show the effects in a language that the medical and healthcare community will understand. But I think in the long run, the idea that you would be, in addition to having the full-on opioid subscription, why don't you get half of that amount and you get a music subscription? I think eventually that'll be normal.
So you're back in Finland now. You're mostly in the countryside, but also in Helsinki. You must be here every week, several days, because you do more in Helsinki than I do in New York, and I'm there all the time. So you are curating, or curating is maybe the wrong word, running an arts festival?
Yeah, no, curating is a great word, I think, for it. I'm very grateful. It's a kind of new direction for me. I'm the artistic director of the Helsinki Festival. The Helsinki Festival is the largest multi-arts festival in the Nordics, held every year, annually in the last 2 weeks of August. Multi-arts means classical music, all kinds of music of different scales. There's XXL, 1.5 orchestras, 3 choirs, Mahler's Eighth, big stuff, then super small as well. With our partner festivals here, we have over 300 events in restaurants and bars called Art Goes Bar or Art Goes Kapakka. It's great. And dance, occasionally different forms of circus or new circus. So it's really a diversity of all kinds of arts, and really takes over the city. And they were looking for a new kind of artistic director, and a friend, violinist Pekka Kuusisto, who's an incredible violinist. If you've never seen his encore at the BBC proms, Google that.
I'm looking forward to the transcriptionist trying to figure out all of these names afterwards.
I'll send the footnotes. And he sent me a text message saying, "Hey, I know you're thinking about doing something else, and maybe not a startup immediately, and given what you've been doing on, maybe you should apply, and I recommended you already." And I was like, "Oh, thanks," I think. And then that led to a process where I did more of my homework. I think as a bass player and musician, you always you got to do the practice and do the work. And so I started researching it, and now just started 2 months ago. I attended the first festival. I'd been in Boston for the last 3 years, so I hadn't seen it. And I saw it like no one else does, which is 3 shows a night, so totally manic.
Yeah.
But it's incredible potential. So also to you and all your listeners, would love to see you in Helsinki next August, and lots of cool surprises and new kind of connecting things. So, and that's also here at SPAN is kind of when I was asked to come and speak, I said, well, I'd like to talk about the very early ideas of what it is to design a festival.
Do you think of it as a way to promote coming to live in Helsinki or promote tourism, or like what is it like if someone took one thing away from the festival, what would you want it to be?
It's a really good. I think one theme actually is our goal is, and we will put art in those nodes in the network where people arrive in and leave Helsinki. So welcome.
All right, well, I'll see you at the festival. Thanks, Marko.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Liam. This is your guest host, Aaron Lammer, but you are the normal host of Design Notes. For people who haven't listened, tell us a little bit about what Design Notes is.
Design Notes is a show that I started partially to satisfy my own curiosity about other design disciplines, but also something that I started to find out what the common threads are between different practices.
What kind of people do you have on Design Notes?
So we've had everyone from furniture designers to identity designers to game designers. I really want to cover like the full spectrum of all of the types of design things people are doing.
And where can people find Design Notes?
You can find it pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. So we're on Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. There's an RSS feed if you're into that.
Well, thanks for letting me fill in, Liam.
Yeah, thank you.